Welcome to the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast Season 2, where we are developing, inspiring, and empowering youth leaders. In this episode, we discuss the YECF and CCAT as community-based processes.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast, where we explore community-based process with Valerie Leach of the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and Megan Joseph and Molly Stevens from Lawrence County's Impact Prevention. As you tune in, you'll notice that the audio is sometimes spotty on the impact prevention side. Lawrence County is in Ohio's Appalachian region. It's in a very rural area of Southeast Ohio, and as many of us are familiar, there is a digital divide and broadband is a significant issue there. We think that their audio is definitely discernible, and while it may seem spotty at times, I can promise you this podcast will be well worth your patience. To start off, I'm Holly Raffel, and I'm a faculty member at Ohio University's Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs. My experience with youth-led prevention began as a high school student in the late 80s and early 90s, where I participated in peer prevention and just kind of been hooked ever since. And Valerie, tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection with youth-led prevention.
Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie Leach with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and I oversee youth-led programmings at the state level and have been involved in this work for probably over 10 years now. And it has truly been a passion of mine since stepping into the world of prevention, where originally my background was criminal justice. And I can see so much value in this work in helping all young people navigate the challenges that they face every day and helping each other, lifting each other and being successful. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Thanks, Valerie. We're glad you're here. And I'd like to introduce Molly Stevens from Impact Prevention in Lawrence County. Welcome, Molly. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm an Ohio Certified Prevention Specialist, and I've been in the field for 30 years, and I am the CEO of Impact Prevention. And I really have a heart for youth-led programming because I've had so many young people that went through our program and they come back and they have grown and they're civic minded. And I cannot talk enough about youth led. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Molly. We're glad to have you here, along with Megan Joseph, who is also from Impact Prevention. Welcome, Megan, and tell us a little bit about your background and your connection to youth led.
Thank you very much. As Holly mentioned, my name is Megan Joseph, and I work with Molly here at Impact Prevention. A little background about myself. So I'm relatively new to youth-led prevention as an idea. I was originally a high school Japanese teacher for about 6 years, and I kind of helped facilitate some clubs for at-risk youth until I moved into my new role. And so currently I'm working with 2 or 3 youth-led teams in the high schools, as well as our regional youth council. So thank you for having me.
We have amazing guests today as we unpack this issue of community-based process. So as a little background for our listeners, the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, who funds a lot of the prevention that goes on in Ohio and nationwide through the Mental Health Block Grant, has details on 6 prevention strategies. And those 6 prevention strategies are prevention education, information dissemination, environmental strategies, problem identification and referral, alternative activities, and community-based process. Today's focus is community-based process, which seems a little nebulous, but it's also one of the most important parts of prevention, because all prevention is community-based and community-wide, and you need to have a strong community-based process in order to deliver the other 5 strategies. And that's really why we're here. So Valerie, over the past 3 to 5 years, the department's really invested in community-based process. Can you talk a little bit about why that's the case?
Sure. As we were learning more through coalition development, we received federal funding, and working with our communities and their development, we were really seeing the role of strategic planning, the strategic prevention framework, and how community-based process was really overlooked across the state and underutilized and often underfunded. And we think, there was just a gap in the understanding of how powerful that strategy is, and that it's much more than just coming together to meet. So we really wanted to invest and explore and study and practice this strategy through our coalition work. And then that has evolved into the youth-led work as well. Because without that data-driven process, we don't know what to do. We're not sure if we're being effective. We can't be culturally appropriate. So we see it as one of the most important strategies of all the strategies to really identify what's going to move that needle.
Over the last 3 to 5 years, we've been integrating 2 frameworks into Ohio's prevention portfolio that really specifically address community-based process. The first one is used with adult coalitions, and that's the Community Coalition Action Theory, or CCAT, and the authors of that theory are Fran Butterfoss and Michelle Kegler. For young people, we have the Youth Empowerment Conceptual Framework, which is the YECF. Yes, more acronyms here for our prevention folks. And that was created by Deb Holden and her colleagues. Why was it important for the department to not only emphasize and lift up community-based process, but also build theories and frameworks around that process?
So as we were learning, we really saw the need to ground this work in the science. We didn't have that prior to the strategic prevention framework. We had this framework, we had all the strategies, but how do we really ground the core work of a coalition or the core work of youth-led programs in evidence, in theory? It hadn't been done. So, working with our partners, working with U of Ohio University, we found these 2 frameworks. And again, working with our practitioners and learning through them, it was, we all came together and collectively decided that these 2 make the most sense for the work that's happening to elevate coalitions and to elevate youth-led programs in the state. And it's even had somewhat of a national impact because other states and national organizations are looking to us as we continue to elevate this work.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for our listeners out there, I think it's really time to dive into what the YECF and the CCAT are and what it means in practice. Molly, we're excited that you're going to be here to talk about the YECF with us today. How would you describe the Youth Empowerment Conceptual Framework, or YECF?
Well, the Youth Empowerment Conceptual Framework, I feel, it's a framework to help us gauge empowerment of our groups, the empowerment process, and also helps us to see the individual growth of our young people that's involved in these programs. Through our work with our young people, we will do things like leadership skills and give them all kinds of different ways to participate, because not everyone has a great skill set as a speaker. So we might need someone behind the scenes to help write the script so that that person looks really good whenever they're talking in front of other folks. So we learn to work around the young people's strengths and weaknesses and work cohesively as a group, giving lots of opportunities for young people to make the decisions within the group, and involvement opportunities, like I said, abound. They also gain knowledge about our communities, diving into data that we look at to see what we need to move the needle on. So they become very civic minded, I think, just because of the involvement of being brought to the table and asking, well, what do you think about this problem that we're looking at? Or what do you see as a problem that we're seeing in this data? So I think the framework helps us guide the group empowerment, and it also helps us to figure out what our young people need and how we can help them grow, what knowledge, skills, and attitudes that they need at their particular time in their lives.
So a question for you. Our listeners out there are probably thinking, wow, that's amazing what your young people are doing. How is the YECF actually supporting you in leading that work?
YECF is used by the adult allies to help set milestones, so to speak, for our groups. We look at group empowerment, including opportunities for involvement, always making sure that our young people have a voice whenever we're making decisions, is involved in the group structure. Under group climate, we look into group cohesion, group resiliency, collective efficacy, and outcomes efficacy. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about the group part of the YECF. And then on the individual side, it helps us be able to know where our young people are in regard to emotional empowerment, including leadership, and being able to participate, in the group. Cognitive empowerment is another thing that we look at. Knowledge of whatever it is that we've identified in our data that needs to be, the needle needs to be moved on. Knowledge of resources of our own area. And critical thinking is a very big key with that whole cognitive empowerment part. And then also with the individual, we look at behavioral empowerment. Our young people, as I mentioned before, are civic minded, and I think they become that way because they feel like they're an integral part of a larger community, and they're valued by the community about what they think about what it is that we're looking at and what we need to do, what work we need to do to help our communities be healthier. And then just participation in social things that's going on, that we have going on. And then a lot of times we always try to help our young people get prepared to go and talk to our elected officials, because it's very important for them to know what we're doing. And so there's a real important part there about our elected officials know what our young people are doing, and that they're working to move the needle and make our communities stronger and healthier places.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Molly. It sounds like you have a lot going on down there in Lawrence County with your young people. And I just have one final question that some of our listeners may be thinking about. So when it comes to the YECF, you mentioned that that was really a guiding post and a way for the adult ally to set milestones. How or do you share the YECF with your young people who participate in your youth-led programs?
Well, we use the strategic prevention framework as our framework, to go through the steps and start with the end in mind of working with data. And we do have a huge poster that shows what all it talks about, but we do share a completed version of it with our young people, just so that they're equipped and they know what our target is, so to speak. But we don't share it until it's completely pretty much done, because it is there can be a daunting task, but we do share it, yes.
Absolutely. So it sounds like the YECF is a way to create the space for the young people. It's not necessarily a tool for them to be actively involved in creating it, but it is good for them to know about it, so they know that what they're doing is important and what they are doing is grounded in theory. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Thanks so much, Molly. Now, if it's okay, I'd like to turn our attention to Megan. So Megan, the Community Coalition Action Theory was developed by Fran Butterfoss and Michelle Kegler. And their goal was to really think about how to evaluate the impact of coalitions. So it was originally designed as this evaluation tool to prove that coalitions do work. Although it's really difficult because community-based process, while it's integral, it's not necessarily that intervention that's going to move the needle. You need a coalition to have a successful environmental strategy or do prevention education, or to find the need to select and implement those strategies. But they want to take a step back and say, why do coalitions work? And so they developed this tool to evaluate coalitions. So it's not really meant to be like a formulaic approach to build a coalition, but really to see where you're at. So at that, knowing that background, can you tell us a little bit about how you would describe the CCAT to another peer or colleague in prevention?
Absolutely, Holly. So the way I really see the CCAT is as a snapshot of your coalition and the functions within that. And you're going to see a lot of overlaps with the CCAT and the YECF. So where the YECF might talk about that group efficacy, the CCAT's going to have things like synergy and have your community context all wrapped up within that. So stepping into the development of the CCAT was really useful to me personally. So as we see it as that snapshot, I was helping develop this with our coalition last year in the heat of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I mentioned at the introduction, I'm relatively new to the world of prevention. So I'm less than 2 years in total. And so working through this in the last summer, being less than a full year into my career, was the perfect, like, dive in to the deep end, head first into the theory, into the data-driven piece of coalition work. One of the great values of the CCAT is that it is perfect for onboarding people into your coalition. It provides that background. It provides that why of your coalition work, and it gives you kind of a forward-thinking motion into what work you're going to be doing, into that strategic planning process. So the CCAT provides a snapshot of the coalition and its function. So while it may have been originally developed as that evaluation tool among coalition members, it's really going to provide that overall looking at how the coalition was developed and what the goals are moving forward.
Thank you. It sounds like you found a way to use the CCAT in your everyday practice as a coalition director. So can you tell us a little bit more about how it's been useful to you as you've been moving ahead with your coalition work?
Absolutely. So personally, as I mentioned before, I'm relatively new to the world of prevention. Currently, I'm less than 2 years in, and last year when I was working through the CCAT process with our coalition, I was less than 1 year in. And so it was really a process of diving into the deep end as a coalition coordinator and going through this process with them. It is a perfect tool for onboarding new members. While last year, through COVID-19, we did see a slip in membership, I'm certain that many coalitions suffered that same malady. So I think that a lot of coalitions would have had that problem last year. But through that, after everyone was able to take a breath and regroup, we were able to use this as a way to reach out to the community and say, this is what our work was previously, here's how we came to be, here's what we're doing now, and here's what it's going to be like if you participate with us. And so with that, I think that we've seen about a 25% growth, where we've had some new members going into moving out of a pandemic. Hopefully, anyway, we're hoping that that is behind us. The other thing is with our core members. So we've had a core membership of about 15 members. we're able to revisit this and celebrate our successes. I think a lot of coalitions and organizations and people in general sometimes have a difficulty, especially in helping professions, to say, this was my success, this was our success, here's what we did. Or in times where you might be a little more discouraged, when you see membership slip, it's good to go back and say, but look what we did. And having that document, that narrative, and that there's a graphic that goes with it as well, which I'm a visual learner, so that was very helpful to me. And so having that is really, really nice. But then the last thing that I really like to use it for is when we're moving forward into maybe work of subcommittees. So currently we are going through a suicide prevention strategic planning community with our suicide prevention subcommittee. And so we can look at that CCAT model and see, okay, these are our goals. These are those health outcomes that we're looking for. How does this fit into this initiative we're working towards?
Thank you, Megan. And what I hear is a little difference, where I hear the YECF is a framework that hangs in the backdrop of the youth-led programs work. And so it's something really for the adult to create that space. But what I'm hearing from you, the CCAT's really collaborative, and you have a lot of involvement from the coalition into creating the CCAT, but as well as using the CCAT every day. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that the case for you?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that was also really interesting to me is, because when I was working through it, I didn't have as much context. I was able to learn from all of those coalition members and have them tell their story and say, here's what it was like when the coalition was founded. I was able to work with Molly, and she was able to kind of give me all this context so that I felt confident when I was talking to other people about the coalition. And so that's why it's so critical with new members, is you get this collaboration from all the other members and get their input. And it really builds synergy, which is one of the things it talks about.
One thing that Molly mentioned several times was this use of the strategic prevention framework along with the YECF. How do you integrate the strategic prevention framework along with the CCAT in your work with adults?
Good question, Holly. So the CCAT and the SPIF really go together well. They're complementary to the work we do. So while that CCAT is going to provide us that context and that background, the SPIF is the basis of our work. It's that foundation. And so having both of those moving forward, both data-driven processes, I think it's really setting up a coalition for success for all of their efforts.
Thanks so much. Molly, kind of to wrap us up here, you are the Executive Director of Impact Prevention, and you have an active CCAT and an active YECF. How do you feel like that works together in a single organization, having both frameworks?
I think that it's helped with our adult coalition to really dive into what is going on in our community at large. And then with our youth, we rely on the Ohio Healthy Youth Environment Survey to see what's going on in their community, so to speak, also within their school districts. So it's just two different settings, but both of them gives us a framework along with the SPIF to work around. One actively involved with the adults, as Megan spoke to, and then the other one is something that we kind of fill in and then share with our young people later and say, hey, look, you did this. And it's something for them to be proud of. And then, of course, we always celebrate even the smallest of milestones with both groups, because it's very important, I think, to keep people involved. But it works. It's just something that you have to experience it to really experience the work to really appreciate.
Absolutely, thank you. So as we close down, I would like each of you to think about one pearl of wisdom you would give to our listeners out there. So Megan, as folks are thinking about whether or not the CCAT is right for them, what would you say?
The greatest advice I can offer is engage as many members as possible and try to capture those new members and capture your young people. One of the things we really like to do is find that overlap in our youth-led prevention young people and our coalition. We're inviting those youth council members, those YLP teams to the coalition proper, because they're in the CADCA coalition sectors. You have to have that youth voice. And so if you're trying to provide them the background to move forward into your adult coalition, I'm going to put that in air quotes because I think that's kind of how we've been referring to it. I think that really it's our community coalition, and youth are a big piece of that. So providing them the background of this, being involved in that CCAT process with those new members, it was so valuable to me, and I know that it will be valuable to others.
Thank you so much. And I love that framing of community coalition. I really appreciate that, Megan. Molly, there might be some of our adult allies out there who are thinking about, should I work with the YECF? Is this the right thing for me or not? What pearl of wisdom would you have for those folks who are thinking about the YECF?
Well, for me, I always tell people youth-led prevention works. And I strongly urge any adult to consider investing their time and energy to establish a team. It's very rewarding. And the use of sounds like it might be a very complicated thing, but it's not. And it's very rewarding to see our young people grow and learn and feel a part of our community. So I would strongly urge anyone to dip their toe in and get involved.
Absolutely for that. And from a practical standpoint, it's important to note that Fran Butterfoss, one of the authors of the CCAT, also served on the authorship for the Youth Empowerment Conceptual Framework. So when you see that community coalition and the YECF, they do naturally intersect because they have the same development teams. So I do think that what you're seeing in practice is what was hoped for, as both of those theories were sort of ground up through a lot of practitioners. So I think that was by design. So I'm really excited to hear that that's been your experience. We really appreciate having Valerie, you give the state perspective, and Megan and Molly, you provide us with a local perspective here today on our podcast. Thank you all to our listeners for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast.
Thank you for joining us today on the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast. If you would like more information on our work, visit us at ohioadultallies.com. You can find more episodes on Spotify, iTunes, and other platforms by searching Ohio Adult Allies.